Expand your empire, pilot your void ship through the warp, and claim the mantle of Rogue Trader. Owlcat Games has teamed up with Games Workshop to bring the first ever classic RPG to Warhammer 40k. And let me tell you guys, it's insane. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today we're breaking down everything you need to know to have the perfect start in Rogue Trader. A huge thank you to Owlcat Games for sponsoring this video. Warhammer 40k is one of our favorite universes to cover here on the channel, so having the opportunity to go hands-on with Rogue Trader early really does mean a lot. 2023 has truly been a banner year for cRPGs, or classic role-playing games. The genre has really found new life with what I'll call the D&D audience, players that want a story-rich, immersive, single-player adventure. Rogue Trader looks to indulge in all of those wants and desires, and the developers behind the adventure, Owlcat Games, are no strangers to the genre. Their first game, Pathfinder Kingmaker, saw a ton of success, and their second title, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, saw similar success. It makes sense then that Games Workshop would turn to the Cyprus-based studio to bring the Warhammer 40k universe to life. As someone that still considers themselves a novice when it comes to Warhammer 40k lore, this is exactly the type of game I needed to understand the subtle and sometimes not so subtle nuances of easily one of the most complex game universes out there. If you're new to cRPGs, let me be clear what type of game Rogue Trader is, because let's be honest, there's a lot of 40k games out there, and they're not all created equal. Rogue Trader is a single-player, story-driven, turn-based role-playing game. You assume the mantle of Rogue Trader, and it's your destiny to travel across the dangerous Coronis expanse as you assemble a crew, establish trade, and build your empire. If you're familiar with Pathfinder, then you'll be right at home with Rogue Trader, as a lot of the base Owlcat Games formula is present in this game, but it's the incredible world building, lore, and overall setting of the game that will immediately draw you in. But enough with the preamble. You're here because you want to learn more about this game, and after dozens of hours, I feel like it's my job to help new players avoid some of the mistakes that I cluelessly made. So, with that in mind, let's get to it. If there's one decision that can make or break your cRPG experience, it's difficulty. Make the game too easy and you'll end up bored with little to challenge your seemingly godlike powers. Make the game too hard and you'll end up replaying the same section over and over again, most likely falling off the bandwagon because you never managed to progress the game. Rogue Trader presents the player with a number of preset difficulties, but there's also the added feature of being able to customize every aspect of the gameplay, and if you understand how each of those parameters impact the experience, you can make a pretty well-informed decision from the start. There are a number of key categories I want to point out, mainly so that you can understand how each of the pre-made difficulties influences that parameter, but also so you know which specific difficulty setting you might want to customize. The enemy unit dodge modifier influences the base chance for enemies to dodge all types of attacks. To make the game easier, you can reduce that to -50%, or make the game much harder by increasing it up to 50%. Party momentum gain is another one that can absolutely make or break your experience in combat. Momentum allows you to tap into unique abilities called heroic acts and desperate measures. When things are going good and you have a lot of momentum, characters can activate their ultimate abilities, which often gives them more opportunities to move and attack. If your momentum falls, then your characters can employ their desperate measures, which are equally as powerful but often come at a cost. We'll talk a bit more about this later. At -50%, this drastically reduces the speed at which your party gains momentum, making the game harder. On the flip side, at +50%, this greatly accelerates how fast your party gains momentum, which means getting their ultimate abilities much sooner. Another important parameter is NPC characteristic modifier, which just increases or decreases the characteristics of all NPCs by a certain percent. It's some rather innocuous text, but plays a huge part in changing the difficulty of the game. Increasing characteristics impacts everything, from damage to defenses, to how quickly an enemy can pass a check to shrug off a status effect. There's also max duration for hard crowd control effects, which can be set all the way up to unlimited, which means you'll need to use active skills to cleanse your team of negative debuffs. Another straightforward one is enemy hit point modifier, which increases or decreases how many hit points, called wounds in this game, the enemy has. Finally, I wanted to point out one last parameter, damage required to receive injury, which dictates how much damage a player-controlled character needs to take before they receive an injury, which are negative debuffs that drastically reduce your character's effectiveness. Obviously, there's more here, and I encourage you to take some time with each preset and really see how the game manipulates each parameter at each tier of difficulty. It's something I honestly didn't spend enough time with, and looking back, I wish I had a little more knowledge going into the game so I didn't feel so lost. Once you've locked in your difficulty, it's time to create a character, and this is where, in typical cRPG fashion, things get absolutely insane. If you want to keep things simple, you can pick from 3 pre-made characters. Hakata is the first option. She's a soldier archetype, which means she favors ranged weapons. If you wanted to slap a bolter on a character, then the soldier is your best bet, as their core focus is movement and ranged combat, utilizing cover, capitalizing on dodge, and dealing burst fire damage as well as AoE damage. The soldier's feature ability is called Run and Gun, which grants the character additional movement points, reduces the action point cost of their next attack, and makes it so that the next attack doesn't count towards your turn's attack limit. On the back end of the ability, you do take a debuff which reduces your ballistic skill by 10 for 1 turn. Hakata is from an Imperial Homeworld, which gives her +5 to ballistic skill and +5 to perception. Her origin as an Astra Militarum commander gives her access to the Regimental Tactics ability, which greatly increases the damage your team does to enemies directly next to any party member for 1 turn. You can't see it from the simple overview menu, but each of those choices, Archetype, Homeworld, and Origin, all feed into the pool of potential talents and abilities you'll eventually be able to unlock with Hakata. But all of this applies to the other pre-made characters as well. Darius is the second option. He's an operative, which relies on intelligence and perception to find and exploit enemy weaknesses and defenses. An operative's core focus is precise single-target attacks, penetrating enemy defenses, area debuffs, and consistent firing positions. The feature ability of the operative is called Analyze Enemy, which grants a stack of exploits on the target based on the character's intelligence bonus. Any enemy with exploits takes additional damage from the operative's next attack, and the more stacks an enemy has, the more damage they take. However, once you successfully hit an enemy, the stacks fall off and you have to build them back up. Darius is from a Death World, which gives him +5 to strength, toughness, and agility, but -5 to intelligence and fellowship. I want to point out that Death World talents are all about survivability, so it's not a bad homeworld choice for an operative who usually is light on defenses and often exposed on the battlefield. His origin as a crime lord gives him access to Surefire Plan, which is a really interesting ability that adds stacks of the Surefire Plan buff that Darius can spend to empower his next action, that being either attacking, moving, or debuffing an enemy. The final pre-made character is Barad-dûr. He is a warrior archetype, which means all melee combat all the time. The warrior focuses on melee damage, movement, dodges and parries, armor, taunts, and soaking damage. As far as my experience goes, melee is wickedly strong, so in this case, it's not bad to bring a warrior to a gunfight. The warrior's feature ability is called Charge, which essentially gives your character a free movement plus attack. It's limited in its range, but can be used to string together multiple kills during a single turn. Barad-dûr is also from a Death World, which means he gets the same bonuses as Darius, +5 to strength, toughness, and agility, but -5 to intelligence and fellowship. His origin as a commissar grants him a few key characteristic modifiers, but also gives him access to the ability at all costs. This is an incredibly strong ability that has 2 functions. First, it can be used to mark an enemy target. Whatever character kills that target will receive a free turn with 4 movement points and 2 action points, good for a quick attack. Second, if used on an ally, they gain an additional 3 movement points and 1 action point their next turn. As far as pre-made characters go, not bad, but if you choose from this small selection, you're missing out on so many things. And while it can be a bit tedious, if you understand what goes into making a good character, you can jump into the first act of the game knowing your leader is the cornerstone of your entire team. In my opinion, creating a custom character is really satisfying because you really do get to control every facet of who they are and who they will be in the game. That level of control equates to power long term because if you understand how to build a character properly, you'll end up with more synergies between all of the different facets, which will ultimately mean more success during combat. To start, you'll get to choose your character's appearance, starting with their portrait. There are 23 pre-made options, and when you select one, it actually gives you a character that looks similar to the portrait to build off of, which I thought was pretty cool. We won't spend too much time here in this section, but there are the usual assortment of options, including 24 male and 28 female hairstyles, 39 beard options, 36 different tattoo options, which can be layered up to 5 times, and 39 augmentation options, which you can layer twice. However, where things start to get interesting is with the various homeworlds. We touched on Imperial worlds and Death worlds already, but let's take a look at the flavor of every world so you can understand how it will impact your character. Choosing Death World gives you access to Survival Instinct, which gives you temporary HP when your health drops below 30%. Death World characters also get a huge bonus to dodge and armor if they have at least 1 point of temporary HP. As I said before, they also get +5 to Strength, Toughness, and Agility, and -5 to Intelligence and Fellowship. Death World talents are all geared towards survivability, and here you can see what some of those options are. Keep in mind that all talents are selected as part of your progression experience. Each choice we make during character customization increases the pool of talents we get access to throughout the game. So you're not getting everything here simply by selecting Death World, but they do now become options as part of your progression. If you choose to be Voidborn, essentially born in space, you gain Fortune, which allows you to reroll any failed attack, dodge, parry, characteristic, or skill test with a flat 20% chance of success. Additionally, any enemy dodge or parry against Voidborn characters have a 20% chance to fail after a successful roll. Voidborn characters also gain +5 to willpower and intelligence, as well as -5 to strength. If you scroll through the talent options here, you can see that most things are tied to luck. 10% chance to deal double damage here, 20% chance to outright avoid lethal damage there. As you'll come to see with each homeworld, everything is built around a different theme, so keep that in mind as you're piecing together your custom character. Hive-world characters grant you strength in numbers, which increases your resolve if surrounded by a certain number of allies and enemies, while decreasing it if not surrounded by enough. Hive-world characters also gain +5 to Fellowship and Agility, and -5 to Willpower. As far as talents goes, this one is a bit less focused, with some talents increasing your capabilities when near allies, and others just outright making you stronger. It's really important when building your character that you think about what type of playstyle you're going to want to lean into. If you're playing an officer whose archetype is built around buffing and supporting allies, then Hive World might make a lot of sense. But something like Operative, where you're often on your own during combat, might be less effective. It's not about right or wrong, but instead about connecting the dots and creating a character that works from end to end. If each step along the way the systems support one another, you're going to feel that in the gameplay. Forge World characters get to choose from one of 3 augmentation systems. Subskin Armor grants increased armor, Locomotion System grants increased movement points and dodge, and Analytics Systems grants increased critical hit chance. Forge World characters also receive +5 Intelligence and Toughness, as well as -5 Fellowship. Again, we see an array of talents here, and it's important to know that you don't need to choose all of them. Like I've said a few times now, multiple systems feed into your talent pool, so something like Steel of the Forge, which grants bonuses for wearing heavy armor, might not be something you need, and that's okay. If you choose Imperial World, you'll gain access to Humanity's Finest, which allows you to simply add +10 to any characteristic except for weapon or ballistic skill. This just gives you a slight stat boost out of the gate. As you might expect, talents here are a combination of survivability and rooting out corruption. Things like Better to Die for the Emperor not only grant modest buffs, but also increase resolve when you're close to dying. Other talents like No Heresy plays right into the lore of the game, with Imperial World characters dealing increased damage to Xenos and demonic creatures. Finally, there's the Fortress World, where life is a constant battle. If you choose this homeworld, you'll gain Never Stop Shooting, which grants the character a chance for their next attack to cost no action points based on the number of enemies they've already killed. Fortress World characters gain +5 to Perception and Willpower, and -5 to Fellowship. Talents here are straightforward and are all about increasing offensive capabilities. And while there's the odd talent out that's about survivability, most of the talents revolve around dealing more damage in one way or the other. Once you've selected a homeworld, you need to choose your origin, and this is easily the second most impactful choice you'll make after your archetype selection. This choice essentially dictates your subclass and greatly influences your playstyle. We'll walk through these, and I'll try and best lay out how each origin affects your gameplay. As we discussed before, the Astra Militarum Commander is all about enhancing the party through its core ability, regimental tactics, as well as supporting talents. Most of the talents play off of the commander's positioning, greatly enhancing the character and allies if they're adjacent to one another. By choosing this origin, you get +5 to ballistic skill and perception, which push it more towards a ranged focused character. But that's not a hard and fast rule, as characteristics can always be offset when leveling up by equipping gear. The origin itself pairs well with the officer and the soldier, as a lot of its abilities and talents synergize well. Slightly contrasting the commander is the commissar, which is a much more melee-focused origin that is tasked with keeping your party moving forward, greatly increasing your combat capabilities, but often at a slight cost. We talked about at all costs before, which can be used to mark an enemy or buff an ally, and you'll see that theme in the commissar's talents as well. Certain talents like duty and honor are a perfect example of the double-edged sword this origin presents, increasing the damage your ally takes by 50% when under the effect of at all costs, but also increasing their action and movement points significantly. If you like what you see here and you're leaning more towards a melee character, the commissar pairs well with the warrior, officer, and I'd even say operative, as they both aim at exploiting enemies in some capacity. As we discussed before, the crime lord has access to Surefire Plan, which gives them various buffs based on their next action. If you choose this origin, the supporting talents all continue to feed into the baseline feature, so you really need to understand the core mechanic of the origin to make the most of its kit. The class also gets a slight boost to weapon skill and perception, again pushing it slightly towards melee. This one's a bit tricky, but it's clear that crime lord and operative go hand in hand. There's very little in the way of team synergy with this origin, so in my eyes, you're either looking to double down on that, which is why the operative makes sense, or trying to make up for some of its shortcomings with an archetype like officer. In the end, I think the goal with this origin would be to build out a character with insane debuff and single target potential, which is why it's a natural fit for the operative. If you're looking for that beefy holy warrior thing Warhammer 40k does so well, look no further than the Ministorum Priest. Its feature, War Hymn, grants momentum based on the character's willpower, as well as additional momentum if the character is near enemies. The priest gains +5 to toughness and willpower, further pushing it towards a frontline melee support character. To really solidify the origin's tie to the lore, you simply need to look at the talents, which are mostly about survivability, durability, and dealing additional damage to Xenos and Psyker enemies. This origin really isn't offensively focused, so know that before making your selection. That being said, it pairs well with the warrior and officer archetypes. Next up is the Navy Officer, which blends concepts of melee prowess and team support. Its feature, Brace for Impact, grants deflection, which is essentially damage reduction for you and your allies. The Navy Officer talents are almost exclusively built around Brace for Impact, giving your allies under the influence of the ability more maneuverability and survivability, making this an ideal origin for a frontline tank-type character. The Navy Officer also gets +5 to agility and fellowship, which synergizes well with the kit. The Navy Officer is best suited for frontline action, so pairing it with the warrior and officer makes a whole lot of sense. The next origin, Noble, is easily one of my favorites, but it's also more complex than anything we've talked about so far. Its feature, You Serve Me, forces you to assign an ally to the Noble, which acts as their servant for the duration of combat. Anytime a Noble's abilities affect the servant, they gain +5 to all characteristics until the start of the Noble's next turn. The servant also gains increased critical hit chances against enemies that the Noble attacked in the previous turn. The idea is that the Noble and the servant need to work hand in glove to be the most effective during combat, and all of the talents further reinforce this idea. The synergy between the servant and the Noble is everything, and talents like You Kill It really get at the heart of that idea, granting the Noble bonuses if the servant kills the target the Noble previously attacked. Other talents like You Are Next also gives you a way to reassign your servant if things get rough in combat, but that adds more complexity to the already complex playstyle. Ultimately, I think the Noble pairs well with just about any archetype. It really just depends on your playstyle. I'd say Officer and Operative are both good choices, but you really could make anything work. Finally, let's talk about the Sanctioned Psyker, and truly, we saved the best for last because this origin is much more in-depth than any of the previous origins we've discussed. Choosing the Sanctioned Psyker is really step 1, because there's a step 2 we'll need to discuss that no other origin has access to. The Psyker feature is relatively simple, giving characters less of a chance they'll trigger a psychic phenomena. If triggered, these can reduce the momentum of your party, distract them from combat, lowering morale, or simply cause bad luck. It's a bit of a wild card that all Psykers, sanctioned and unsanctioned, have to deal with. When you have any Psyker on your team, you have to worry about the Veil, which is a meter, much like momentum, that fills up every time a Psyker uses an ability. Once the Veil degradation reaches 15, then the chance to cause these phenomena double, and any major Psyker abilities have a chance to cause Perils of the Warp, which have even more catastrophic effects. True to the lore of the 40k universe, Psykers walk a very fine line, and the more you tap into the Warp, the more you mess with the integrity between the Materium, the living world, and the Immaterium, the Warp. As such, all of the Psyker's talents either help slow the Veil's degradation or increase the Psyker's damaging potential. To put it simply, the Sanctioned Psyker is this game's version of a glass cannon, but it's unlike any glass cannon you've ever experienced in another game. As such, pairing the Psyker with an archetype is rather challenging, as it's almost its own standalone archetype, but if I was forced to choose, I would say Operative, Officer, or Soldier will all work. As I mentioned, there's a step 2 to choosing a Sanctioned Psyker, and that's choosing a specialty. Biomancers specialize in manipulating the body, giving you access to powerful abilities that heal wounds and alter physical characteristics of your team. Diviners focus primarily on increasing your ability to avoid enemy attacks, while also greatly increasing the potency of your party's attacks through various buffs. Pyromancers, for anyone who's played any other fantasy game, is all about fire, and not that lame spirit fire either, the burn you until you're a pile of ash fire. Sanctic Psykers are about as support-focused as they come, with its feature and all talents buffing the characters or the party in some way, shape, or form. Finally, there's the Telepath, which features a powerful single-target ability and an array of talents aimed at debuffing enemies that are affected by Psyker abilities. Truly, choosing the Sanctioned Psyker origin opens up an entire new layer of gameplay that no other origin has to deal with. But if you're willing to take on that extra dimension to the gameplay, you're rewarded with a really fun experience. Not knowing exactly what I was getting into my first time playing, I chose a Sanctioned Psyker, and honestly, I don't regret it for a second. I will admit I didn't understand how all of the pieces came together until about 20 hours into the game, but once it clicks and you realize how your homeworld connects to your origin and how that all connects to your archetype, brace yourself, because it's a damn good time. Take a breath, because our next choices, while cool, don't play a huge part in shaping our gameplay experience. For each custom character you create, you'll need to choose a Triumph and a Darkest Hour. These amount to your best moments and worst moments based on the selections you've made up until this point. Luckily, these don't bear any major significance on gameplay, but your choices will shape some dialogue options in the game, so make sure to read every option carefully and choose what's right for you. Okay, break time is over, because now we need to make the most significant choice in the entirety of the character creation process: choosing an archetype. Think of this choice as your base class, but as you can see, there are layers to your progress that unlock at both level 16 and 36. If you hover over each archetype, you'll see that your initial choice does have a direct correlation to the secondary archetype you can unlock. So, for example, if you choose the Soldier archetype, you'll only have access to the Bounty Hunter, Master Tactician, and Arch Militant secondary archetypes at level 16. As I said, archetypes set the foundation for a character's playstyle, and all of the choices you've made thus far will either synergize with the right archetype choice or work against you in a way that's not at all satisfying to play. The first archetype, the Warrior, is easily the most straightforward in the game. Their playstyle focuses on melee combat with an emphasis on dealing high damage and survivability. Their keystone feature, unlocked from the start of the game, allows them to move a short distance away and attack a target without counting towards the attack limit of the turn. This essentially gives the Warrior a free second attack if you can chain things together properly. The Warrior's ultimate ability, Daring Breach, is unlocked at level 4 and essentially reinvigorates the Warrior, giving them a completely refreshed turn. They gain back all movement and action points, plus get additional movement points based on their agility. On top of that, there is no limit on melee attacks during this ability. It's a wickedly powerful ultimate, and as I alluded to before, Warriors are incredibly powerful frontline warriors. As you level up, you'll invest more into your Warrior, increasing various skills, characteristics, and sometimes unlocking new abilities and talents. This is true for all the archetypes we'll talk about. Here are some of the abilities that the Warrior can unlock. Abilities like Reckless Strike and Forceful Strike lean hard into the Warrior's ability to deal damage, but other things like Taunting Scream and Endure provide essential utility for your team. It's not all offense all the time, and the key is to build a balanced character that can handle the ebb and flow of battle. As you might expect, specific Warrior talents further emphasize the strengths of the archetype. Offensive-focused talents like Contempt and Rage and Desolation are all options that will tilt the warrior towards a more aggressive playstyle, while Thick Skin, Living Shield, and defensive maneuvers provide the archetype with essential survivability enhancements. Like all characters, how you choose to build out your warrior is completely up to you, but with a handful of abilities and dozens of talent choices that span across your archetype, origin, and homeworld, it's clear the warrior can be molded to fit whatever playstyle you choose. The next archetype choice is the Officer. With a focus on improving the combat capabilities of allies and increasing the speed at which you gain momentum for your party, this is the ultimate choice if you are looking to add some support to your team. The Officer's keystone feature, unlocked at level 1, is Voice of Command, a buff that increases all characteristics of an ally for 1 turn. At level 3, the Officer also unlocks its second keystone feature, Bring It Down, another buff that immediately grants an ally an extra turn with a limited number of action points. The archetype's ultimate ability is called Finest Hour, which grants an ally a full extra turn with full action and movement points and no attack limit. This class is all about teamwork, scaling mostly off of willpower and fellowship. The Officer really requires a skilled hand to master, mainly because buffing allies comes down to maximizing how well you enhance your team. Talents like Focus and Physical Encouragement are good, but only if you understand how the Officer's own characteristics, in this case Fellowship, make these talents even stronger. That's a common theme throughout all of the Officer's talents and something you'll have to get accustomed to quickly. The same could be said for the Officer's abilities, which are exclusively aimed at other members of your party. Both offensively and defensively, the Officer's job is to keep the team in the fight, and whether that's providing a damaging buff or temporarily increasing an ally's movement points, it's all aimed at total victory. The next archetype on the list is Operative, and as we've discussed a bit before, the name of the game here is Exploitation. Almost everything in the archetype's kit is designed to add an exploit debuff to enemies, which can then be influenced by other abilities to devastating effect. To understand the Operative is to understand exploits, and it's as simple as this. The more stacks of exploits on a target, the more powerful the Operative's next attack will be. The archetype's keystone feature, Analyze Enemies, is a two-parter. At the start of each turn, the Operative applies 1 stack of exploit on all enemies within line of sight. When activated, the same ability also gives the Operative ways to instantly add an exploit to a target, but as you'll see with the archetype's additional abilities and talents, this is just the beginning. The Operative's ultimate ability, Dismantling Attack, immediately adds 1 exploit on all enemies in combat. When triggered, it also grants the Operative a free attack against a specific target, with that attack guaranteed to hit. Until the end of combat, the target of the Dismantling Attack also suffers a serious penalty to dodge and armor, making this an incredible ultimate ability when trying to take down an elite enemy. Additional abilities like Precise Attack and Perfect Spot help enhance the Operative's ability to deal single target damage. Other abilities such as Joint Analysis extend exploits advantages to the team, and while you could consider this a buff, the Operative still functions primarily as a lone wolf. As you might expect, talents for the most part all revolve around exploit, and the name of the game here is how much you can capitalize on maximizing its impact. With just a few talents to enhance the keystone feature, not only will the Operative deal more damage to enemies, but they'll reduce their characteristics, cripple their movements, and disintegrate their defenses. The final base archetype is the Soldier, and if your dream is to strap a bolter to your character and run around the map raining hell on your enemies, then this archetype is for you. The Soldier's keystone feature is called Run and Gun, and it grants the Soldier additional movement points, reduces the action point cost of their next attack, and gives them a free attack before reaching the attack limit. On the back end of that ability, the Soldier becomes winded, which reduces their ballistic skill by 10 until their next turn. Where this gets interesting is with the second keystone feature, Revel and Slaughter, which immediately removes the winded effect and increases the Soldier's offensive capabilities. But the kicker is, you can only use this ability after killing 3 enemies. If you fail to do that, you won't be able to activate the ability, and you'll have to suffer the winded effect until it wears off. The Soldier's ultimate ability is Firearm Mastery, which, as the name suggests, gives the Soldier unparalleled range capabilities while active. During Firearm Mastery, the Soldier can make a number of extra attacks, all at no action point cost. Until the end of the Soldier's turn, their first attack against a new enemy will also automatically crit. The Soldier's weapon is also immediately reloaded. Unlike the other archetypes, the Soldier focuses almost entirely on enhancing their own capabilities. Their abilities are focused on increasing movement, providing additional benefits whilst in cover, and dealing increased damage. The same could be said for the soldier's talents, which more so than any other class provide straightforward bonus damage through various means. There are a few utility talents like combat Medicae, which enhances subsystems within the game, but for the most part, talents boil down to increasing damage or making the soldier better from cover. Like I said before, if your dream is to strap on a Melta and blow away enemies with sheer firepower, the soldier is the right archetype for you. There's one final piece to the character creation puzzle you need to understand if you hope to master building the perfect avatar, and that's characteristics and skills. As we've discussed a number of times already, characteristics and archetypes go hand in hand. For example, as a soldier, you'll want to invest in ballistic skill, which increases your range capabilities. It's all rather straightforward, but it does take an understanding of everything we've talked about up to this point to allocate points with confidence. Characteristics are the primary driver for increasing your character's power, which is why you should really think about every point you allocate. There's also a secondary stat system called skills, and these are less consequential but still impact your gameplay. Skills all tie into systems that come into play during exploration. For example, with a high enough athletics skill, you can traverse an obstacle or move a heavy object, opening up a new pathway. Other skills like Medicae dictate how much HP is restored when using medikits and the quality of the kits you can use. The key with skills is to make sure that you have all your bases covered. Having a character with at least 1 or 2 skills with a lot of points allocated to them means that whatever opportunity arises, you'll be able to capitalize when it matters most. It's a lot, I get it, and to be completely honest, it took me about 15 hours with the game before I fully embraced all of the nuances of the game's character creation. But at that point, it was kind of too late for me. I would have had to reset and restart my playthrough, which is why we're hoping this sets you up for success. Truly, this is the first and most important step you'll take on your rogue trader journey, because very quickly, your party will fill up and you'll need to manage not 1, not 2, but over a half a dozen characters that all level up at the same time. Without a solid foundation, you could very well end up building out a character that just doesn't synergize, performs poorly in combat, and quite frankly, at that point, you're out of luck. Hopefully this guide helped put you on the right path to understanding how to build your character and the systems that dictate their actions. If you want us to dive deeper into the game, the combat, all sorts of things, then we need to hear you in the comments. Drop us a line and let us know what part of Rogue Trader you want to learn more about. Of course, while you're down there, consider dropping us a like on the video, and if you feel so inclined, subscribe. It's still the single best way to help channels like ours reach new audiences. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.